Hey, Polly.
Hey Greg, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. One thing that I have in my house that I stand by is my Safe RX um, locking prescription vial.
Oh, yeah.
Stands out. The kids know what's in there is important medicine, so they don't go buy it. It's nothing. Don't touch it. It's always in the same spot. Love it.
It has
It's a,
like a little combination on top.
exactly
Hmm.
great, easy to use. And I remember when I first started using it, I said, I definitely would love to have them on the podcast. And today it is happening.
Awesome.
Today we have Milton Cohen. He's the CEO of SafeRx, and he's going to be telling us all about the important need of safe storage and SafeRx products.
Great. I can't wait to hear more.
All right. So without further ado, joining us today on the Totally Preventable podcast, we have Milton Cohen, the CEO of SafeRx. Milton, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Greg and Polly. Thank you very much for hosting me here.
It is our pleasure to start off like we normally do. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep the novel down to a short story version for you. But I have a personal story in my extended family around the opioid epidemic, like many people do. I don't think anyone is more than a degree removed in our country from a story as we sit today. And so when I met the inventor of the SafeRx product, which is our main product line here at the company today, he's a practicing anesthesiologist in Fort Collins. I knew that I had to go do this. I'm a father. Many parents out there need this solution to protect their families and households. And as we do get these out there, our locking prescription vials, that is, we will build safer communities and stronger families here across the country. And that's really what we need to do to mitigate this opioid epidemic, is build community and family.
I hear that.
Perfect. Studies show that 2 in 3 teens who abuse prescription drugs say they got it from their friends and family. How does SafeRx address this alarming access point? And what are families still not doing that puts their young people at risk?
Yeah, this is a totally preventable issue. Whether we're talking about pediatric poisonings, or whether we're talking about prescription drug misuse, right? It's all about access control and awareness of the dangers of these medications for those two different populations. And so education is incredibly important on safe storage, securing your meds. Uh, a lot of parents out there are just unaware of the issue, and many parents, when they are confronted with the issue or learn about the issue, ultimately think, oh, that's not my child. My child wouldn't, be thinking about that. And in many cases that they're correct. But the temptation for sneaking a few pills, bringing them into the locker room at school, and selling them to everybody knows who the person is in the locker room at school that will buy them for resale is an incredible temptation, and that has cascade effects on other children out there and other teens who, during those years want to experiment. And selling a few pills a month can make your allowance a rounding error in those age groups. And so awareness among parents and thinking past that initial reaction of, it's not my child that's gonna do this, is really, really important. And the other thing I would say is, the awareness needs to also be around, where are we storing these medications? We can't leave them on the kitchen counter. A lot of pet meds, as an example, that is, animal health medications, are left on the kitchen counter right by where the dogs or cats are fed. And those, for a younger child, can be incredibly dangerous and deadly. There are even opioids that are prescribed in animal health for our dogs and cats. And so keeping them out of sight, locked up, and out of reach is incredibly important. And of course, if you have the opportunity and resources, you should be locking your meds up as stewards of your household, if that makes sense. So it's both awareness and securing our meds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you kind of alluded to this in your answer, but the CDC's reported over 100,000 people have died from drug overdoses in a 12-month period, many involving prescription opioids. So, in your view, in your opinion, how much of this crisis is preventable with better home and storage solutions?
It's a great question, Greg. Thank you. It's totally preventable. And what's important to understand here is that as misuse evolves, if you just take a step backwards, starting at the top of the pyramid and just do a little trace back analysis, depending on the study that you cite, up to 80% of heroin users started with a prescription opioid as their first misuse. When you walk back down the pyramid, 90% of misusers start in their teen years across all substance use disorders, right? Including alcohol, tobacco, et cetera. 90% start in their teen years. And the number one source for teen misuse and initiation in our country for decades, since 2012, has been the medicine cabinet, i.e. sneaking a few pills right out of the medicine cabinet. And so it's really what an epidemiologist, Polly and Greg, would call an index source of the epidemic, if you will, as you do that standard normal trace back analysis. And so it's super, super important. It's totally preventable. We want to just cut it off at its source. There was a professor at Vanderbilt that was working with us on some research a couple of years back. And he put it this way: look, if your boat's sinking, you don't start just bailing out the water, right? You find the hole and plug it first. And that's what we do in terms of secure storage in the home. We plug the hole in the boat, so then we can start bailing and then we can start sailing.
Right.
Many people assume placing medications on high cabinets or in drawers is enough. In 2022, the NIH study showed children as young as 2 can access secured meds in less than 30 seconds. This is interesting because I do Narcan trainings, and people often say, "Oh, I don't know people who use drugs." And I said, "Do you know how many small children overdose? They weren't intending to use the drugs, So what are the biggest myths around safe storage that you wish people would stop believing?
That's a great question. Let's talk about the child-resistant cap enclosure, right? It was implemented in 1970, so that's over 50 years ago now. So it's 1970 technology, right? It's just short of black and white television, right? And here we are with flat screens today.
Yeah, exactly.
NHD, right?
Yeah.
So it's incredibly dated. The requirements for child resistant are only that 85% of test subjects 5 years of age and younger can't open the vial in a timed test, right? And so today our kids have iPads. A lot of our drugs and supplements have moved to gummy form, so they look like candy through the bottle, right? And so that child resistant cap is by its own specification not really great access control, right? And so that's a huge myth that cap enclosure is going to keep my 2-year-old out, because given it enough time and given enough motivation with gummies on the inside, they're going to be able to get into it, right? And so what we really need to do is upgrade our whole concept of access control. There's no reason, for example, that the antibiotic your doctor prescribes to you, right, should be dispensed in the same container that Schedule II opioid is dispensed in, right? They're just 2 different animals, and yet they have the same exact security. So we need to realize that our packaging and our access control is incredibly outdated for all the advances that we've made since 1970. And then we also really do need to stratify our access control by the risks of the medication that are being dispensed, right? So that the container that goes home to that household that knows the least about those risks has the correct security for the risk of what's inside, if that makes sense. So I hope that answers your question. It's this is totally preventable. Access control is a definitive intervention. As a matter of fact, the child-resistant intervention of 1970 generated a 45% reduction in U.S. child mortality at the time.
Wow.
And it's been shown in study after study after study that if you reduce access, you're reducing misuse, right? And so just reducing access and getting the right security for the right medication classes is incredibly important. It's about time. It's been over 50 years. It's time for the upgrade in our view.
Mhm.
So I hope that's helpful.
Yes.
It's
Now,
totally preventable.
it is. It is. And for this next question, I will, I'll say that I was a doer of this for years prior to my prevention days. But nearly 1/3 of adults keep expired or unused prescriptions in their homes. What dangers do these forgotten medications pose, and how can Safe RX help?
Yeah, so those are actually the highest risk vials sitting in our households and medicine cabinets or in our drawers in our bedrooms or nightstands. These are and the reason that they're so much more dangerous is we've forgotten about them, and so we don't know how many pills are left in there. So if somebody's taken a few or taken a bunch,
Mhm.
right? We're not going for our next dose because we're not taking the medication anymore.
Mhm.
We're not really opening that bottle. We're not noticing, right? And so securing medication in the home needs to also come with safe disposal, right? And so when we get that prescription and we're weaning ourselves off of it post surgery after we get our knee or hip replacement or whatever it might be, right? We need to dispose of that as well, of the unused medication as well. A lot of people want to keep them, but the dangers of keeping them outweigh the benefits, because the next time you have an injury, just call your doctor. You'll get another prescription that'll help you through it. Next time you have to go in for surgery, you'll have another prescription that'll get you through it. And in the meantime, if we dispose of that safely, we're really risking the potential need of our child or other household member to have another medical incident that is high cost, both in terms of dollars, but also in terms of grief and pain that family has to suffer through. Because for every person that's lost their life as a result of this epidemic, and there's over 500,000 people now that we've lost, there are countless others that have lost their way. And that's where the extended heartache comes for families and communities as we live in them today. And so it's incredibly important that we secure those meds and then also dispose of them properly. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, John Hopkins study found 71% of adults do not lock up their prescriptions and medications. What's driving this complacency, and how do you think we can combat this normalization of unsecured meds?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's complacency, it's education, it's awareness. Folks like you guys in your communities in Newport, in the Newport County area, are doing the great work of educating people, making them aware of these risks. The complacency is it's convenience. We live in a convenience society. But as people become more aware of the risks, learn more as we educate them together on this issue, I think over time we'll be able to solve for that. And I think that the awareness will hopefully trigger behavioral change to some degree. Now, that takes a while to get consumers to behave differently. And so what's really important is that we recognize the issue nationally, and that we decide really ultimately that we are going to provide different levels of security for medications with different risk, right? And so at the end of the day, when you go home and it's a more secure container, you know, your awareness just by virtue of looking at the packaging is going to change your behavior, right? And so by doing what we're trying to do out in the marketplace, we're going to build awareness by default. People will no longer have a high propensity to just share medications.
Mhm.
You know, many adults out there have said, okay, my teenager is hurt. I might, give him one of these, him or her one of these. They might be having trouble getting through some social anxiety at school. I may give her one of these medications, and the propensity to share is triggered going back to the child-resistant container. That medication came from a doctor. It came in the same container as the antibiotics that I give them when they get their cold. And so I'm just going to give that to them, and they don't really know the difference. When it comes in different packaging, when that awareness is built by the great work of you guys and us, we are going to see that behavioral change come a lot more quickly, if that's helpful. And so that's how I think we get around complacency, is we build the awareness, educate, and get the medications more secure across the spectrum.
Absolutely.
It just makes sense.
Right.
I never thought about it until hearing you talk about it. Like, yes, this class 2 opioid does come in the same prescription as aspirin.
Yeah.
It's just-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, it's like the analogy that I use when I talk to people, Greg and Polly, is, look, we've been dispensing gasoline in 2-liter Coke bottles for 30 years and wondering why the world's on fire. It's we can't get out of our own way sometimes, and we need to catch up with the medication risk, catch up our access control with the medication risk of today. So
Absolutely.
Now, with social media and quick access, easy access to everything that our young people have now, with the increasing accessing of pill challenges and substance content via social media, what role does tamper evidence storage play in prevention?
yeah, look, we aren't going to be able with our product to uh, inhibit or intervene in the quote unquote Snapchat drug dealer that we've all read about and that we all worry about and lose sleep over, right? But as we build awareness, as we secure these medications in the home, right, the teenager awareness of the risks of those medications is going to go up. It's totally preventable. That teenager can ignore that Snapchat. That teenager, if they know, will ignore that Snapchat. And so it's important to get the packaging right, but it's also important for parents to have the awareness, to have those conversations early, because this does start in middle school. I'll tell you a story. When we first moved, I'm based in Denver. I don't know if you knew that. When we first moved to Denver, our daughter was 8 years old and went into middle school a couple years later, and we had to take her off of the bus because she told me that the kids were trading pills here on the bus. They'd pass a book, and in the book there'd be a book across the aisle of the school bus. In the book, there's cash going one way and a pill going the other way. And so we had to take her off the bus, and so it's impairing education, it's impairing development of our kids. We're losing a generation. Over 10 years, if we prevented pilfering alone, we'd prevent 7 million initiations of 12 to 17-year-olds. 7 million kids.
Wow.
That's worth doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So,
How is SafeRx leveraging behavioral science, design, psychology, or technology to make safe storage not just a chore, but a lifestyle habit?
yeah, that's a great question. behavioral science it's overcoming the complacency and I would say, even the laziness and compliance factor, right?
Mm.
Because it's a little bit more work in the pharmacy, and pharmacies ultimately will be paid for that and compensated for that extra labor.
Mhm.
But it's also a little bit more work at home, right? You know, taking unlocking a locking vial, one of our products, we make it as simple as possible, right? The patient picks their PIN number at the pharmacy, so they know the PIN number. But doing that takes a little bit extra time than does to undo a child resistant cap, obviously,
Mhm.
if you're scrambling the code each time. And we want our parents to recognize that that's an investment in their family and community and our and the next generation, because the investment definitively pays off, right? Definitively, it's about those 7 million teens and about saving a generation of our youth. As parents, all we really want is our kids to do better than us, right? And
Mhm.
so we got to keep them on the right path, do better than we ever did in our lives, right? And so we got to keep them on the right path. And that little small investment of time in overcoming that complacency and behavioral issue is definitively worth it. And so when they get that packaging coming home, we hope that they, you know, not do the math in their head, but move through the logic psychology to understand that what they're doing is protecting their family and kids.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Now, is safe medication storage, could that be a workplace issue as well?
It can be. The tragedy of it is that pilfering, which is what we call just sneaking a few pills at a time in secret, right, without discovery. Pilfering happens everywhere, and I'll tell you all the different settings. I mean, it happens in our households with teenagers or visitors to the home. It happens at school in kids' backpacks, right? Somebody knows that Janie Doe has social anxiety and may have a benzodiazepine, which is a Schedule 4 controlled substance and very addictive and dangerous. You may have heard of Xanax or lorazepam, et cetera. Those drugs are the second most commonly misused substances in the prescription drug categories. They may know Janie has that in her backpack, and they're waiting for her to put it in the cubby and go and run to the restroom to go grab some. So it happens in our school locker rooms. It happens in our college campuses. Freshmen going into college have it's their first shared living experience when they go into the dorms. They may not be aware that there are other folks in that dorm that, can get $80 for one of their pills, out on campus. And so they also are victims of pilfering and short on their prescriptions at the end of every month, right? Short on their pill counts, that is, and trying to get an early refill. And so, that victim is suffering not only from pilfering, but they're not able to treat themselves and their conditions by the end of their prescription, right? And so we've talked about households and our kids, pediatrics, all the way up to teenagers, all the way through college. When you fast forward into the workplace, people are aware of this. People are aware of the value of these medications on the street. And so they can supplement their income. I'll tell you a couple of stories here. We have a customer out in Central Valley of California who's pharmacy delivery, right? Many of these deliveries are very, very rural, right? And so they seal the packages for the patient and it goes out. A delivery driver may have, 15 deliveries in a day, 5 deliveries in a day, depending on the route. But delivery drivers have figured out that you can throw that pack on the dashboard, use the defroster to heat up the adhesive, open the package, take out the bottle, take a few pills, put the bottle back in, reseal the package, and nobody knows the issue except for the patient, and the pharmacy hears that they're short bills when they try an early refill.
Wow.
Or a lot of patients won't even realize that they're being pilfered. It's hard to detect. Fast forward, one of our most vulnerable populations as you keep moving through the life cycle, right, of age as we grow older, are our seniors. In senior settings, many of these folks still self-administer medication in assisted living, as an example, or retirement communities, right? They may be short pills. They have caregivers. They have that come into the home that pill for medication. They have maintenance people that come into the home and pill for medication. They may have other residents that they host in the home that pill for medications for purposes of their own misuse or for purposes of selling it. And so really it's at every stage of the life cycle and age category. And it's also in every setting that we have exposure to this issue. Once we secure all of that, all of those folks are going to have happier, better lives and really be safe from the issues that we're talking about here. It's all totally preventable at the end of the day, and we're just glad to be able to work on a project of this importance for the rest of our folks out there of all ages.
How does the US compare to other countries in pill safety, medicine safety? And are there any other countries we should look to for advice?
Well, you don't have to go very far. Once you cross the border, there are much better practices just about everywhere. And I'll tell you really horrifying statistics. We're about 5% of the world's population here in the US.
Mm.
We consume 80% of the world's controlled substance production.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's a staggering difference between the US. In the US, the philosophy is there's a pill for every problem,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Outside the US, there's a problem with every pill.
Mm.
So people are much better both in terms of prescribing, but also in terms of their use of medications when you cross the border out of the United States. And so we can look really anywhere. When we look at access control, when we implemented the child resistance standard in 1970, most of the rest of the developed world followed immediately, either by reference to our statute or by codifying it very similarly in their own code of national regulations, right, or statute. And so basically the world does follow the US on implementations of this type, and access control, at least history has established that precedent. But we can really follow the rest of the world in inverting and just reversing how we think about our use of medications and pharmacy in terms of treating the public and treating ourselves.
All right, Milton, this is your time to just pat yourself on the back here. What is the data showing about Safe RX's effectiveness in preventing diversion?
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you asked the question. We just had a study in 2023 that came out. It was done in Ohio, and it was done in medication-assisted treatment. And what we found there was our vials, LPVs, we call them for short. That just stands for locking prescription vial, but it's less of a mouthful to say LPV, right? And so LPVs were found to reduce the top 3 barriers to patient enrollment in medication-assisted treatment. And why is that important? Well, when a patient enrolls in medication-assisted treatment versus non-medication-assisted treatment, there's a 74% reduction in their utilization of acute care resources. They're going to the hospital so much less, right, with overdoses, with other treatments that need to be done, because their impulses are controlled by the MAT, by medication-assisted treatment. And so when we were found to reduce the top 3 barriers, and one of the most significant findings was in medication security. And in that barrier, we had 39% of patients report missing medication prior to LPV use. Post LPV use, 0% of patients reported medication missing. So it completely eliminated that barrier to patient enrollment. And so that's incredibly important for the folks that have lost their way that are out there, so that we can keep them from losing their lives, and get them into the right treatment, with the right medication security. And so incredible efficacy proven in that study. It led Polly and Greg to the National Association of County and City Health Officials designating locking vial dispensing, or LPV dispensing, as a model practice, here in the country. And so that's very, very compelling evidence. Prior studies had indicated that the packaging itself raises awareness of the medication risk, that household members of an LPV study patient went from, in the 12 to 25-year-old cohort in that household member, said 100% easy to sneak a pill from a child-resistant vial pre-LPV use. Post-LPV use, 100% of those household members said it would be very difficult to sneak a pill or pilfer from an LPV. And so we've got incredible evidence on access control. The benefit of access control can't be stressed enough. I mentioned earlier those 7 million teens over a 10-year period that we prevent from initiating misuse. In our healthcare system, the cost of addiction is so high. For an additional reimbursement of around $7 national average Medicaid, right? We can, that's about what it costs per fill, right? So at the end of the day, substance use disorder in terms of treatment cost, 2.2 million over the lifetime of that patient's treatment, right? And so it's super simple. You can take your dresser change now, right? Or you can go to your safety deposit box later healthcare system. And so over that same 10-year period would be about $236 billion that we would save the healthcare system in terms of treatment cost for addiction. And you know what? We'll save a generation of people. And we'll help all of those folks across the age spectrum, from the pediatric issues all the way up to our senior issues, across the boards, with the right access control. And so, we really do need to do this. We should have done it 30 years ago. But, there is still time for the toddlers that are just, dropping the pacifier and picking something else up in our houses, in our households. That's the generation that this is going to really, really make the big change for. And so I'm excited about that. I can't wait until, I hope it happens in my lifetime.
Yes, absolutely. Many think storage is just for controlled substances, but everyday meds like blood pressure pills, antidepressants, sleep aids also rank in the top calls of poison control. How are you expanding the narrative around what needs to be locked away? And not to, I feel like I was talking about my vitamin D pills the other day. Our listeners are going to know all about my medications, but they are delicious. They're gummies and they're delicious. If I had little kids that saw me munching on gummies every morning, I think they would want to munch on them too. So, I don't know how many vitamin D gummies you need to take, but there are tons of over-the-counter, really less dangerous pills that people have, medications that people have that really should be locked away.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. When we think about pilfering and we think about the risks of misuse or sneaking pills or getting, unintentional access, or even intentional access with respect to folks that are trying to take their own lives. I think it's 60% of attempts use pills that are in the household. So we, many of those medications, like we said earlier, come in the same container, that your antibiotics come in. When we look at pediatric populations, though, those are very, very, very dangerous. Every 8 minutes today, a child goes to the ER, a child 5 or younger here in the United States goes to the emergency room from a drug or supplement poisoning. That's down from 9 and 10 minutes in years prior, which are measured each year by the American Association of Poison Control Centers, right? And so this costs the U.S. I mean, over a 10-year period, we'd save about I think the number is about $3 billion in cost of care. It's about 300 million a year. $3 billion over a 10-year period. We'd save the healthcare system, but we'd save so many of our families the tragic, urgent rush to the emergency room with the scare of your life on your hands with a child poisoning, because that's heartbreaking in itself. And so the way that we think about this is, child resistance is not enough in a world where your vitamin D are gummies, in a world where too much Tylenol, which looks like candy, acetaminophen, will give you renal failure, right? If a child eats too many of them. Blood pressure medication, hypertension, diabetes medications. These are all very, very dangerous to our pediatric populations. And so our view of the world in terms of how we can address this issue is, there's child resistance, and that might be good for the medications that will give your kid a tummy ache, right? But aren't going to kill them, right? And then there are pediatric fatality risk medications for which child resistance is just not enough, right? And those pediatric medications, we have planned for a launch and development a 100 combination cap and closure in our SafeRx line. Right. Today's vial that's in the market for controlled substances is 10,000 combinations, right? We don't need 10,000 combinations to keep that 2-year-old out of dad's hypertension medication, right? But we know child resistance isn't enough. And so when we look at that other closure, it's got fewer rings, it's easier to implement. You don't have to pre-encode it with the patient's preferred PIN number, so it can come right out of the pharmacy pre-encoded universally, right? And that 100 combinations is sufficient to keep a pediatric poisoning from happening, to keep that 2-year-old or up to 5-year-old out of that medication and preventing that tragic issue that families face every day. Like I said, every 8 minutes, a kid goes to the ER. I mean, every 12 seconds, a child is poisoned from a common household product here in the United States. And so access control, is really, when we think about it, we need to have closures that care. We need to have caring closures for our families. And those closures need to span the spectrum of risk of the product contents inside, whether that's your laundry detergents, where every 36 minutes a child goes to the ER from a detergent poisoning, from the detergent pods every 36 minutes, up to every 8 minutes for that drug and supplement, right? We need 100 combinations on that, all the way up to that Schedule II narcotic that needs to have 10,000 combinations and needs to come to you from the pharmacy. It's really ironic here in the United States that we fill these things in child-resistant containers. I'll tell you why. Because the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, which you're I'm sure familiar with, right? They control controlled substance. They audit, police, and fine violators in the entire supply chain for controlled substances here in the United States, from raw material all the way up to the pharmacy counter. Every place that controlled substance goes or is mobile and travels is licensed. Every person that touches it is licensed with the DEA. And look, if you miss your audit logs, if you don't keep the right logs and auditable for your DEA inspector, you're going to get fined and ultimately delicensed if you're not good enough. But that security all the way up to right behind the pharmacy counter just dissipate, like it vaporizes as soon as it crosses the pharmacy counter in that child resistant vial. And if that's not enough to infuriate you, I don't know. Maybe I need anger management class.
No, I'm right there with you. Is there anything on the horizon that might make safe storage mandatory that you might know of?
Well, we have a lot of folks that have looked at this in the past in terms of just upgrading the 1970 standards. It's really about time that we did. If we did, we would totally prevent millions of people having the heartache that goes with this crisis, right? We would totally prevent the that $236 billion that we would spend over a decade from having to go out the door. We'd save the taxpayers money. In a time where we're making cuts, there are better ways, at the federal level, there are much better ways to save money. Super, super simple at the end of the day. And so, it's, I don't know, maybe I'll just leave that one there, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so we do need to do it, but what we really need to do, I'll go back to the question and just say, look, if we can't regulate it because we can't, for political reasons, get that done, it's really important for the market to understand, right? Our health insurers, our providers, and our health providers, our clinicians, and our pharmacy providers. There's enough economics here in that $236 billion in 10-year savings in the healthcare system for this to work for every single stakeholder in the value chain to have an upside in improving access control. And so we believe that our health economics model, which is third-party validated by a leading toxicology and drug safety research firm here in the United States, right? Our health economics model suggests that we can pay pharmacies enough to pay for the increased cost of the vial, to pay for the labor time, to give them a small profit and incentive to dispense and do better access control and better by their patients, and still provide about a 450% ROI, return on investment, to the health insurer that's paying for that. And so at the end of the day, the economics from a market perspective are compelling enough that everybody should want to do this. It'd be a lot faster if we just turned the switch overnight and said, from now on, this is going to happen everywhere. But then, there's disproportionate bearing of that economic cost among the providers. And it needs to really go where the market delivers it so that everybody gets a piece of the upside that is involved and can come from this type of intervention in public health. So there's upside for everybody, and we think ultimately the market will recognize that as awareness builds, as demand grows, as our providers and clinicians specify it with their patients. And so we will get there ultimately. We will ultimately get to the same place as a regulatory intervention with the market intervening and implementing it. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does.
Mm-hmm. If people are listening and they're interested in your product, is there a way for them to purchase it themselves before pharmacy?
Yeah. Thank you, Polly, for asking that. So we sell the product in many different ways. We sell packages for those folks that need to childproof their home when they bring their children home from the hospital, or when that child starts to climb and can get up to that high cabinet, right? So we have 10 packs, I think it is. I think you can buy those on Amazon. You can buy a couple, 2 at a time. You can even buy a kit where you can program your own code into the cap, as opposed to a pre-encoded vial that comes to you with a PIN number already in the cap, right? So there are many different ways for people to get these. They can ask their pharmacy if their pharmacy stocks them. We're down in the Southeast quite a bit in major retail. We are available on Amazon. And many folks like you and state and county departments of health are using opioid settlement funds to get these out into the community. We do an incredible amount of business with customers that are backed by drug-free communities, the state opioid response and tribal opioid response federal programs, I think I mentioned drug-free communities, but also now that the settlement funding is starting to flow, we're seeing a lot of large projects. Colleges and universities are starting to hand these out at orientation. K through 12, our schools are giving them to parents at back to school. So there are tons of ways for you to get them, in many cases for free, from some of these organizations that are distributing them into these different settings. And so we encourage your listeners to ask the question of their schools, ask the question of their college and universities. What are you doing to protect our kids from these risks, right? And we'll have a few announcements later this year in K through 12 that'll really, I think, build a ton of awareness for folks out there that hear about it and read about it, because I expect some reasonable media coverage on it. So you can go ask the different folks that are engaged on this topic, like yourselves, because many folks, many organizations out there do have them and are distributing them in communities. And you can also go to Amazon. You can find us there on Amazon if you just search SafeRx locking pill bottle or locking vial. Yeah, so happy to get these out, and we're very, very excited about the future that this can bring us, because I mean, after all, we're all parents, and most of us are parents, and you know, the most native instinct of any animal in the animal kingdom, including humans, is to protect their young and their families, and in our case, as humans, position them to do better than we did, you know, during our lives. So we're truly excited about that and about the future that we can bring to the U.S. here.
There's so many great things about this product. I mean, from the ease of turning the pen numbers to I only use the blue ones because I think that the brown ones look too much like the prescription bottle, so I use the blue.
Right.
But the numbers are big enough for when I don't have my glasses on, I can still see the numbers. So kudos to whoever put that in your design, because that was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. You know, we're very lucky. We had a great design and engineering. The original inventor did a terrific job with the development of the product. Like I said, he was a practicing anesthesiologist. He spent literally about 6 years and close to $500,000 out of his own pocket to develop the product iteratively, and he did a fantastic job. It does everything it needs to do at a very, very low cost and at very, very high speed behind the pharmacy counter, which is also very important to minimize that extra labor cost for our pharmacy customers, right? And so he did a fantastic job. In the iterations that we've had since the original prototype, we've been able to build in better visibility on the numbers. We've been able to build in finger holds in between the numerals on the cap, on the rings, and you know, we have seniors that tell us it's easier to use than a CR or child-resistant vial because it doesn't require hand strength. A lot of arthritic patients and our seniors have trouble with the push down and turn or hold the tab down while you turn it. That can be really tough on our senior and arthritic populations, and we've been able to engineer in successive iterations solutions that improve the usability for, you know, across the spectrum of patient populations. And so thank you for noticing. I really appreciate that. You know, we'll take good, nice comments on our product all day.
Well, Milton, I thank you for your time. One thing that I just must say thank you for is because you also mentioned the pilfering. And I think that a lot of times when people hear safe storage, they just think about protecting from someone using the prescription. But talking about how the resale and the pilfering could do that, I think it's going to be very eye-opening to a lot of our listeners and viewers. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time and all the great work that you're doing with SafeRx and all the information you shared with us today. I really appreciate it.
Greg, thank you, and thank you, Polly, also for hosting me here today. It's great to be with you. This is all totally preventable, and you know, we appreciate working with folks like yourselves and organizations like Totally Preventable and your affiliates up there in Newport to really help solve this problem and bring the awareness and the solutions that the country needs out into our communities and families. So thank you guys both very much for your work also.
Thank you. We'll be looking out for you when you do that media for the new things.
Terrific. Great to be with you. Have a great rest of your day, and good luck with Take Back Day. I hope that's impactful for your communities. I know it's coming up here in a couple of days. We're excited about it, and it's one of those semi-annual events that where we do get to build awareness much more so than any other days of the year. So good luck with that, and super appreciate you guys. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye now.